The best prog band, it's not really a prog band. Who is that? I'll tell you who it is to me, and you're gonna probably disagree here. I'm gonna show 3 prog albums, but I'm gonna lead into and do a little introduction to get to those 3 prog albums by one band from the late 60s into the 70s, into the early 70s. And this is a contest entry for a friend of mine in Canada, Glen, Kellaway, from the basement, has a YouTube channel, a music YouTube channel. Great guy, we're similar in age, so we kind of like a lot of the same music. The sweetest guy on YouTube in the vinyl community as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm not gonna hold it against him that he's from Canada and Canada produced Rush in terms of prog. I will put a link below to Glen's channel because he's trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So if just 50 of you, please go over there and subscribe. A lot more would be even better. Subscribe to him. And he does some live streams occasionally with some other people, and we might collaborate on something. We actually have in the past. And he's the sweetest guy. And support his channel because we need nice people. We need fewer wankers and nicer people making these videos. Enjoy it too. It's all for fun, right? Now, he's having a contest, show 3 prog albums and what those prog albums mean to you. So I'm going to start with a group in the 1964 called, I believe they're called the Paramounts. And they turned into Procol Harum. Procol Harum is my choice. Now, they're one of those bands that people say, oh, they're not prog, they're art rock, and they're blue-eyed soul, and they're everything else. But I think, for my taste and my love, they're prog, and I'm sticking to the story, and I'm standing by that 100%. I will also put a link below to a prog video for people who don't like prog, and believe me, I got more intense upset people commenting on that video who are very protective of prog. But I'll get into prog a little bit. But in 1967, Procol Harum came out with The Whiter Shade of Pale. And that's probably one of the most famous songs of the 1960s. It's been overused in countless movies, from The Big Chill to every other friggin' movie. And it's a gorgeous song. I mean, Gary Brooker's soulful, blue-eyed soul vocals are amazing. His piano playing, Matthew Fisher doing that great Bach-light organ intro. Keith Reed's out there, beautiful, just psychedelic in a way, poetry in terms of his lyrics. The great guitar playing of Robin Trower. And that's Procol Harum. This is a Record Store Day 50th anniversary of that song. Now, that song almost, maybe in a way, I would say, destroyed the band, because how do you follow that song up? And there wasn't even an album out to the following year. And in the States, their first album finally came out in 1968. Now, these records don't count as my 3s. This is the lead up to my 3. The first Procol Harum album. This is the American version. The mono version, it had a poster. This is a promo copy I have from the Coleman collection, my friend's collection. Love having this. And unfortunately, the stereo version was a rechanneled stereo one. But in America, Whiter Shade of Pale was added to this. In the UK and everywhere else in the world, Whiter Shade of Pale wasn't on the album in 1968. But I would suggest, if you really want to hunt down an amazing copy of this record, if you can find a clean copy, which are hard to get, the Italian pink cover version. Now, it doesn't have Whiter Shade of Pale on it, but this is the one to get, the best sounding of this version. It's not a great sounding album to begin with. It's a little muddy, but this leads into it. Now, why do I call them prog? Some of you are going to say, oh, they're not a prog. They're not like Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Why do you call Procol Harum prog? They're a rock and roll band, maybe art rock or something. But they had these great arrangements. They had these great epic pieces of music. And I think this is my first of the 3 albums that I'm going to start with. And I bought this. This was the first Procol Harum album I ever bought. Got it in 1968. I didn't have their first album. I did have the Whiter Shade of Pale single in the US, but Shine On Brightly, I got this album, and I remember playing it at least twice a night for over a month. This is the UK cover, which is not as good as this beautiful American kind of infrared cover. I think when I first saw this, I used to think it was an underwater photograph with the kelp and algae. Of course, you realize it's out in the desert and it's sort of a infrared style of photograph, and it's a beautiful, beautiful cover. There's somewhat of a lineup change by this album, by their second album, and they get back from the Paramounts, B.J. Wilson, fantastic drummer. If you've heard his drumming on Conquistador from the live Edmonton album recorded in Canada, you'll know what his drumming, the recording on that album, which I'm not showing here either, is just is really beautiful. It's really out there right in front, and he's one of those drummers that doesn't get shouted out a lot. B.J. Wilson, fantastic drummer of Procol Harum. But this album I played so much, and it ends on side 2 with a song called In Held 'Twas in I. It's like a 17, 18-minute epic of parts and pieces and segmented songs written by various members of the band. It was re-recorded for the live Edmonton album again, and it's just an amazing piece of music. Remember, life is like a beanstalk, isn't it? So the idea of prog, there's a certain over-the-top pretentiousness of prog, which I think Procol Harum does not have. Maybe that's the closest song they have, and some would say they're more of, they're a soulful band. Prog, to me, is not soulful at all. There's too many time signature changes. I always joke about the great, and I admit Bill Bruford's one of the greatest rock drummer of all time. He seems to be on every other or every third prog record ever made. He's not on a Procol Harum record as far as I can recall, but we got B.J. Wilson, so it's a different type of drummer. To me, it's more soulful sound. Gary Brooker's voice is that blue-eyed soul, and it's just wonderful. And of course, they get to be a little more rock and roll in some cases because they started out as an R&B band before they became Procol Harum. This record starts out with Quite Rightly So, a song co-written by Keith Reed, their lyricist, Gary Brooker, and Matthew Fisher. And Matthew Fisher has this beautiful organ sound, which is very melodic, very Baroque. So they bring in a little bit of the psychedelia period too, but I don't even call them a psychedelic band either. What's great about Procol Harum, they don't really fit into any one category. They're psychedelic, they're R&B, they're rock and roll, they're blue-eyed soul, and they're prog. They're prog here right now. This album for decades was my favorite Procol Harum album, and I suggest that anyone who's into this type of sound, who likes Whiter Shade of Pale, and you've all heard it, which is the most played song ever in the UK on jukeboxes, radio. But in the America, I would seek out the original A&M pressings on all 3 of these albums that I'm showing. And those are the ones with this brownish kind of cover label. These sound really good. These sound better than the later A&M reissues. I think they sound better than the UK copies. And actually, I would suggest any record on A&M that has this, if you like Cat Stevens, if you like all the artists on A&M that you like, try to find these labels if you can find a clean copy. And this is my clean copy of this. And it's a beautiful recording for the most part. Maybe not totally audiophile dynamic, but it sounds really, really good. Now, then came, in 1969, A Salty Dog. I didn't latch on to this immediately. I thought the beginning of the song, the title song, A Salty Dog, sort of had this slow, meandering opening with the foghorns and the seagull sounds. And I didn't realize the beauty until I got somewhat older. And now this is my favorite album of Procol Harum, A Salty Dog. And it's a prog album as far as I'm concerned. Mazzy says it's prog. It's prog. If you can find the Mobile Fidelity that came out about 5-6 years ago, it is so great. It trumps everything else. But again, this has that A&M Brown label, and it is quite good, and I highly recommend this record. It has a number of songs, thematic songs about being at sea. It has Wreck of the Hesperus, Crucifixion Lane, Pilgrim's Progress, Boredom. It has the great rock and roll, scorching guitar playing of Robin Trower, who unfortunately would leave the band, I believe, after maybe their 4th or 5th album. And he did do Bridge of Sighs, great album. He was very influenced by Jimi Hendrix, and on some of his solo albums, he has that Jimi Hendrix sound and vocals. But I really miss him in Procol Harum when he left. But they're a band that I have everything they do. I want to do a ranking soon because their music is amazing. Some took me years to get into. I was a little disappointed when the albums in America came out on Chrysalis after the live album, but I have grown to love those albums, so that'll be down the line. But this album is my second choice in the Prog Revue, and shouting out Procol Harum. Prog, the best prog group who's not really a prog group, Procol Harum. I'm gonna skip Home. I like it, that's from 1970, so I'm skipping over that and going directly in 1971 to Broken Barricades. Now this is a magnificent album. This gets more on the rock side of prog, less of that diddly middle, yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, classical time signature, change out bullshit and lyrics and vocalizing that has no soul, that's almost technically pure, but no balls to it and no soul to it. To me, that's the problem I have with prog. And then some wankers are going to say that this guy hates prog, knows nothing about prog. I get it. These guys have the soul of it, the rock and roll soul of it, and they're not as technically perfect as those great Bill Bruford time signatures and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes and the like. So I like that Keith Reed, the lyricist, gets his own solo picture there, and there's the rest of the band. Simple Sister, Power Failure have these great guitar riffs, again, from Robin Trower, and they're so good. The opening, Gary Brooker, Keith Reed, Simple Sister, is a wonderful opener. This is a fantastic prog rock and roll record. Doesn't get into a lot of the long production and the long over-the-top excessiveness that most prog bands get into, but this, to me, is a fantastic rock and roll prog record. It's produced by the great Chris Thomas, who would later go on to produce The Pretenders and a lot of great UK records, and it's a fantastic record. So Broken Barricades, these are the 3 prog records from one band, the greatest prog band who may not be a prog band, Procol Harum. Anyway, link below to Glen Kellaway's channel. Please support him. Let's get him at least 50 of you to subscribe. That I would love that. I'm asking you, please, pretty please. And Glen, it's an honor being your friend. Someday we'll meet in person. And thank you for watching Skip a Light Fandango, doing cartwheels on the floor. What does that even mean? It's like a children's song. Mazzy loves you.